Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I will let our speaker this afternoon introduce herself.
Hello everyone, my name is Susan Callison and I'm the Program Specialist for the Greater Iowa Chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. And today's program we're doing is called Effective Communication Strategies. So it's an overview of tips and tricks and strategies to help better communicate with folks who have a diagnosis of dementia. Then I am also adding, I've got some handouts here, and we're going to talk about understanding and addressing behaviors that are typical or to some of the later stages of dementia. So we'll go over some of that information as well today. So here's the objectives. By the end of today's program, let's go back here. Last viewed. Went too fast. Okay, by the end, that's not fun. What's going on here? By the end of today's program, you will be able to explain the communication changes that take place throughout the course of the disease. We're going to decode the verbal and behavioral messages that are delivered by someone with dementia and respond in ways that are helpful to the person. And this is helpful to both the person with the diagnosis and the caregiver. And we're going to identify some strategies to connect and communicate at each stage of the disease. And so we're going to start by just talking about what is communication. Well, communication are many things. There are many ways that we communicate. As we're talking today, there are many ways that you're understanding what it is that I am presenting. And I want you to know that over 90% of the communication that we're going to have today is not the words that we say. So a very small percentage of the communication that we do every day are the words or the language that we're saying. And so when somebody has dementia, many times they have trouble coming up with their words, or at some point they lose their words. And their behaviors become their way of communicating. And just knowing that helps us better understand and gives us clues to how we can figure out how to communicate with somebody who has dementia. So some of the other things that matter are things like our body language, our tone of voice, how loud or soft we are, or certainly our facial expressions. And in addition to that is things like the relationship that we have with someone. You know, if there's somebody that we love that walks in the room, we already have a communication with them. Or if there's somebody that we're afraid of, we're already communicating with them by how we have known them in the past. So there are many, many different ways that we communicate, and we're going to need to use more of those other ways when we're communicating with somebody with dementia when they can't communicate like they did in an earlier point in their life. And so there are different ways that we want to communicate in the different stages. So for the purposes of our education, we talk about 3 stages of the disease. We talk about the early stage, middle stage, and late stage of the progression of the disease. And this can be anywhere from 2 to 20 years. So each stage varies how long anyone is in each of the stages. And these are just some similarities of what it might be like for many people in the early or middle or late stages of the disease. In the early stages, these are typical that folks might be still able to convey thoughts and feelings through their language. They can still communicate like they have been pretty well. Not a lot has changed during the early stages. They are able to make decisions about their future care. That's really important. We all want to be able to make our own decisions, and we still can do that during the early stages for sure. We may interpret what others are saying. We can communicate pretty well in the early stages. Once the progression happens, though, in the middle stages, folks need to use more basic words and sentences. They need to simplify how many words they use. And as a caregiver, we need to simplify how we're using our basic words and sentences to be more effective. We need to rely more on tone of voice, facial expression, and our body language to get our point across and to better understand what somebody is trying to tell us. We continue to need the emotional connection and meaningful activity. So we all need to have meaningful things that we do every day. We need to have purpose to add to our quality of life. And so that's an important part of being able to communicate, is by making sure that we all get to do meaningful activities in our day-to-day life. In the late stages of the disease, or the more severe forms, we start to have more challenges with communicating. We may still respond to familiar words, phrases, or songs, but we need to use more body language and our other senses besides our speaking ability and our words to communicate. And so it changes. The disease is progressive. Unfortunately, it does continue to get worse. However, there are things we can do to improve our ability to communicate. And so in the early stages, some of the changes you may notice includes things like difficulty finding the right words, or taking longer to speak or to respond, or withdrawing from conversations, or struggling with decision making or problem solving. So and these are, again, are in the early stages. These are some of the symptoms that folks are going to start noticing. As they start to progress it with having more symptoms, these are some of the things that might be happening. And so we need to identify, what do we do about that? I didn't ask if these videos are going to work, so we'll see if they do. This is Martha Turney, and she's a licensed social worker and the Associate Director of Research Volunteer Programs for the National Office of the Alzheimer's Association. And she's going to share a little bit about her story. And if the video doesn't work, I know her story, and I get to tell it. Let's see. No sound. I think they're going to come back. But Martha just talks about some of the things that I've already shared with you, that as we start talking to somebody who is in the early stages, we need to make sure that we are connecting with them in what matters to them. It's the perfect time to find out what matters to them. I mean, I think if you all just think about, what do you love? What's really important to you? What really matters? What do you hate? What do you really dislike? What really matters to you in your everyday life? And so we know that this disease is progressive and that it will get worse. And so in these early stages, many people can still communicate quite well. In the early stages, when we first get a diagnosis, it's very difficult to deal with some of the changes and having to face the fact that we have to have this diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. However, it's still a great time for us to stop and smell the roses and write down our story and what matters to us and what's interesting or exciting. And in these early stages, we can still do that much, much more effectively. So do we want to try and see if we can get those? No shut sound. Maybe. We have videos.
So you can learn things about what they might prefer as the disease progresses.
Thank you.
For example, as the disease progresses, a person might have difficulty finding words. Caregivers often struggle to know what to do in that moment. Early on in the disease, you can ask. You can say, you know, if you ever have trouble coming up with a word, would you rather that I jump in and give you the word, or do you want me to wait and allow you some time so you can find it on your own?
So Martha talks about asking the person who's struggling with the communication what works for them. How do we give them honor and respect and let them decide, how do you want me to communicate with you? And we should just ask. And even though these may be difficult conversations to have with somebody that we have respected and honored and cherished our whole life, it might be hard to ask them these difficult questions. But if we don't ask, then we're not honoring and respecting their value and validating what's important to them. So it's important to just ask and say, do you want me to suggest a word if you're struggling, or do you want me to just give you more time? And I think we'd all want that. So, and certainly in the early stages we can do that. In the later stages, it gets more difficult. So time's wasted, and we need to actually have those difficult conversations and not wait. So to connect in the early stages, here's just some tips. So to connect, we should ask directly how to help them communicate. We need to have that conversation. We should keep sentences clear and straightforward. Slow down, ask one question at a time, or make one statement at a time. Leave plenty of time for conversations. We certainly need to be very patient and allow extra time to be able to understand and let our folks be able to participate in the conversation at their ability. We need to include the person in the conversations that affect him or her, including planning for the future. You know, I work with a lot of families that have a diagnosis that are in the early stages. We have several early stage support groups, and we provide training for the families when they're trying to deal with this. And probably the most common comment I get from families who are dealing with the new diagnosis is that people talk about them when they're sitting right there, like they're not there. Well, they are still there, and they are still there clear until the very end stages of the disease. They're still there. Their self is still there. So we certainly need to include them, and especially when they are able to voice their opinion. And this is one of the most frustrating things for folks once they get a diagnosis, is that we leave them out of the conversation and out of their choices, and they're right there. So just being aware that they get to be included in the communication. We should avoid making assumptions. This is another one that's real easy to do. It's certainly quite common as we have aging parents. We assume and we learn about how other people have handled things, and we make assumptions on decisions that need to be made. And we shouldn't make assumptions whenever possible. We should ask them how they feel about a situation or how they want things to go. We need to speak directly to the person who has the diagnosis. This one is incredibly important. We need to get at eye level, make eye contact, call them by name. I mean, we don't want to be talked to like that. And it's especially important if somebody has a diagnosis of some form of dementia. It helps them better hear and understand what we're trying to communicate. We need to communicate in a way that is most comfortable for the person. So some of the options include on the phone or email or in person. And so again, we need to ask, what's the best way that you like to communicate? Do you like to be able to read what's said in front of you? Or, you know, do you like to just talk on the phone? Do you need to hear my voice? Or what works best for you? So we need to ask and find out if it makes a difference, what would be the most comfortable thing to do. We certainly need to laugh together. It can be a very challenging situation to deal with a diagnosis of dementia. And if we can get to the point where we can laugh about it, it helps us better connect. And so we need to make sure we're always adding humor into our conversations whenever appropriate and whenever possible. We need to be honest, laugh together, and stay connected. I think you'd all agree that when we have a good relationship with somebody, it helps us better understand and communicate with them. And we do that by connecting with them in an honest, trustworthy way. So some of the changes you may notice in the middle stages, you'll start noticing that folks might start having an increased difficulty finding the right words. So as the disease progresses, the brain gets a little more challenged to be able to come up with the right words in many situations. You'll see that folks start using familiar words more repeatedly. They use the words that they know and understand more often and stop using words that they don't know and understand. They might start inventing new words to describe familiar things. One of the common ones I hear is that we all know this is a watch. We've been calling this a watch since we were little kids. We know this is a watch. But when you have dementia, you might lose the ability to know what the word is to call this. But you have other brain cells that are working, and you still have logic. So you can look at your watch and call it a hand clock. So it is, right? It's a hand clock, but you invent new words or new ways to describe things, and that's okay. Is we need to be able to use the words that we do have available, and it just shows that other brain cells are working and that we can use logic to be able to better understand and communicate what it is we want to talk about. Folks may start having easily losing their train of thought. So they might be telling a story and then they get lost or forgot what they have already said, or they lose track of, now where am I going with this story, and not be able to get back on track. So, many of us lose track of where we're at in a story, so that's not dementia, but when it gets more serious, where folks really start having challenges with tracking on a regular basis, that's another symptom that things are starting to get more challenging. In that situation, again, you might suggest a direction you want to go with the story. You might want to say, it's okay. You don't have to continue if you're not feeling comfortable. Folks speaking less frequently. And you can imagine if it gets difficult to communicate or share your story or talk about things, if that's getting uncomfortable, you can't think of the right words. Sometimes the reaction that we get from folks when we can't think of the right words can be upsetting or confusing. We're going to stop talking as much if it's uncomfortable and if it gets difficult. So that might be a concern that something's going on and the disease might be progressing. Folks will start to begin to communicate through their behavior rather than their words. That will happen more often when they've lost their words. And so when that happens, you need to consult a doctor if you notice major or sudden changes. If somebody has a diagnosis of dementia and conversation or communication is getting more difficult, there could be something else going on, like they could have a UTI or an infection, and so sometimes it helps to get good medical care if a situation like that happens. Or it could be that the disease is progressing. So it's important to talk to your doctor if you start noticing those things. And this is Beverly, and she is a caregiver support group facilitator, and her husband has Alzheimer's disease, and she's going to share a little bit about her story.
I would advise couples, and I usually do advise the caregiver who comes to the group and is caring for a spouse, that you take your time. Always count to 3 before you respond, because it gives you time to think about your answer and what's going on. Generally, in a marital dispute, it's quick. It's back and forth. You're quick to give an answer. When they've been diagnosed, to sit back and say, okay, you're supposed to be the one that's reasonable here. Let's change how we do this, because there's only one thing you can control, and that's you. You cannot control them and their process.
So when somebody has dementia, they sometimes behave in a situation where their caregiver, their family, or their caregivers, direct caregivers, think they're doing things on purpose to be annoying or difficult. And that's never the case. If somebody is being difficult, it's that they can't help it. They don't know how to communicate differently. But as a caregiver, we can learn a different way to communicate, and so it's our opportunity and responsibility. This can be incredibly difficult in a situation where you have a couple who maybe has been married for over 50 years. They have been communicating a certain way their whole life, and now they have to learn a new way to do this. And so it can be incredibly challenging and difficult. And caregivers many times think and feel like, why do I always have to be the one to change here? Why can't they change? Well, they can't help it. And so, yes, it's true. The caregiver needs to be the one every time that makes the change. And you know what? It's worth it. Because if we can learn to communicate differently, it's going to improve our quality of life as a caregiver, because we're going to get along better. And it certainly is going to improve the quality of life of the person with dementia, because they're going to be happier. So it's worth it, even though it's really hard. So in order to connect, approach the person gently. We need to be calm and patient. We approach from the front, say who you are, and call the person by name. So when somebody has dementia, there's a lot of confusion and distraction going on in their brain. Sometimes they can't hear you or they can't feel that you're there. And so you need to come around and approach from the front, make eye contact, get on their level, and call them by name. If you come up behind somebody and put your hand on their shoulder, for example, and start talking to them, that's really going to startle them, and it's not going to be an effective way to communicate. So coming around the front and making eye contact, smile first, that can be more helpful. Maintain eye contact and get at eye level if seated or reclining. So this is really important that we get right down at eye level. And I've witnessed this happen, that I could see somebody completely calm down once I got at eye level and wasn't towering over them. And that can be difficult at times, but again, it's worth it. Avoid criticizing, correcting, or arguing. It's not going to help. Many times that's our nature, and we know the person is wrong. Well, it doesn't matter if they're wrong. We need to make them feel like they're right. We need to pay attention to our tone and take our time. If we notice that we're losing it and our tone is getting escalated, we can just stop, take a deep breath, even walk out of the room, adjust our attitude, and come back. Can be a much more effective way. We're going to get a lot better results than if we continue if our tone is a problem. And this is Rebecca, and her mother had Alzheimer's disease, and she's going to share a little bit about how that happened to her.
She could sense my frustration because occasionally I would lose my patience and I would bark at her. Why are you asking me that question again? I just answered that question 2 minutes ago. And then she would get frustrated because, you know, she was very old school and she said, don't disrespect me. And I didn't ask you that question 2 minutes ago. It's a new question. So phase 2 of our relationship was like, okay, that's a new question. I'll answer it again.
So she better understood. And when she understood, she was able to make a better response. So in the middle stages, to connect, we need to join the person's reality. Be with them where they're at in their reality. We can't bring them to ours, but we can try to be with them where they're at in their reality. We need to keep respect and empathy in your mind, and then assess their needs. Let the person know you hear his or her concerns, whether they are expressed through words, behavior, or both. Provide a brief answer and respond to the emotions behind the statement. And I have a little example of how this happened. There was a gentleman who he was actually visualizing things that weren't there. So his reality was that there was an animal underneath his bed. And the family could not see the animal. There was no animal. And they kept reassuring him that he was safe and everything was okay and there was no animal. Well, that just made him more and more agitated. And he just kept getting more and more frustrated every day. He kept saying, what's with that animal underneath the bed? And so the family finally learned maybe they needed to try a new approach. They needed to assess their needs and connect with them in their reality. So the family finally said, okay, tell me what the animal looks like. And the guy said, well, it's the strangest thing I ever saw. It's blue. It has lots of arms and legs. I've never seen anything like it. Well, how big is it? It's about the size of a squirrel. And they started laughing about it, and they had a good time. And then the animal went away. And you can see there was a way different outcome by meeting him at his reality and helping him feel validated that what he believed to be true could be true. And then the animal went away. It never came back again once he was validated and valued for what he believed to be his reality. To connect, keep it slow and basic. Use short sentences and basic words. Speak slowly and clearly, one person and one question at a time. So this is a new thing, especially for me. I talk really fast and I ask a lot of questions, one right after the other. So we have to relearn how to talk to somebody who's being challenged with dementia. It's not going to be very effective if I keep asking the question a little differently every time. It's going to be easier if we just ask the question, give them time, and then maybe even ask the question the very same way again. If I ask it differently, then I've given them new information for them to process. But just slowly, clearly, one person, one question at a time. Limit distractions. If the TV's on, shut it off. It's okay for somebody with dementia to watch TV if it's interesting or entertaining and you're not trying to have a conversation at the same time. But the TV and the radio going on at the same time can be incredibly distracting, and it makes it harder for people to listen to the conversation that's happening. So having a quieter space or even having low background music, if any, or sounds of nature, that can help be able to better understand the communication that's happening. Be patient. Not easy, but again, it's worth it. Offer a guess or fill in the words. If they're feeling like that's an okay thing, that's a way to help connect with somebody who's struggling with the communication. To connect, give multiple cues. You can use visual cues and gestures. So sometimes people can still read, even though they can't hear and see what you're having to say. You might be able to write it down, and some people are better able to understand the communication if you write it down, or use pictures. Sometimes pictures help. Certainly gestures can make a difference. We need to avoid sudden movement that can be distracting or upsetting. Write things down. Put answers into your questions. Repeat as needed. Turn negatives into positive, and avoid quizzing. So an example of this is putting answers into your questions is, if you want to ask somebody what they want to wear today, you're helping somebody get dressed, you might say, what do you want to wear today? Well, there's lots of answers to that question, and it can be very overwhelming. But if you say, do you want to wear the red shirt, and you hold up the red shirt, or the blue shirt today, now you've simplified the options, you've given them choice, which now you've validated that they get a choice and they still get to choose what is happening in their own world, but you've limited it to one or two, and you've shown them the shirts. And so then they can participate in the answer. And they might say neither, but at least you've given them options, and then you can pull up a different one or two. When you're asking them, what do you want for dinner tonight, there's tons of options. You can say, do you want hamburgers tonight or macaroni and cheese? Again, they get two choices. It gives them options. They get to participate in the decision, but you've simplified it and you've put an answer into the question so that they can have a choice and simplify it to be able to come up with an answer. To connect, we want to respond empathetically and reassure. Again, join their reality. They can't join yours, but be with them in their truth or their reality. Provide reassurance that you hear and understand them. Focus on the feelings, not the facts, and validate and redirect the person as necessary. So I want to talk a little more about focus on the feelings, not the facts. So one of the things that we've learned is that emotional memory is not lost like factual memory is. So we might forget people's names, we're going to forget what we just said, or we might forget what somebody just told us, but emotional memory lingers. So this is good information that you can use for your strategy in communicating with somebody with dementia in the future. And so if you know that you want to connect emotionally, you can come up with better solutions on how to communicate. People will remember how you make them feel, even though they don't remember any of the details of what you said. After you guys all go home today, you're going to remember how you felt today. You're going to remember, was it, subconsciously at least, was it hot, was it cold, was it interesting, was it fun, was it awful? You probably aren't going to remember the details as much as you're going to remember if you're inspired or entertained or educated. So that is still true for people who have dementia. And so when you're caring for somebody with dementia, you want to focus on how they're feeling, not necessarily the facts. How can I have a pleasant experience here? So that's part of the strategy for how you communicate. Changes in the later stages that you might notice are communication is reduced to fewer and fewer words and sounds. Possible responses to familiar words and phrases. So it's harder to connect, but you can still connect. To connect, listen for expressions of pain and respond promptly. If somebody's in pain, they're going to have a difficult time hearing and understanding what you have to say. So pain is an important thing to notice, identify, and treat. Help the person feel safe and happy. We all want that, no matter what. So that can help us connect and build that relationship. We need to continue to bring respect and honor and empathy to every conversation. Keep talking. When you visit somebody that has dementia and we need to connect with them, we should still keep talking. Even if they are not able to respond, it's important that we keep talking, but give them more time. I mean, we shouldn't go on incessantly, But notice their body language. Are they responding to our talking? Then we should keep talking, keep telling stories, sharing information. And we should use all 5 senses to communicate. In the later stages, that becomes even more important. Sandra's mother is now in the late stages of Alzheimer's disease, and she's going to talk about her experience.
I know that my mom feels aggravated. I know that she feels alone. I know that she feels confused. And I know on any given day, I don't know if I've made it better for her. I try. In these later stages, I've come to recognize that being really aware of the 5 senses is really important. Touch seems to give her a great deal of comfort. I know when I come over, I'm going to brush her hair all the time. My husband noted to me recently, he said, you know, you should see the look on your mom's face when you're brushing her hair. She's just happy. She's just happy. She doesn't say a lot. And I do it for a long period of time. I comb it, I braid it, I do funny things with it, but it just allows me to just be with her in a way that makes her feel comfortable.
So she was able to figure out how to communicate in a different way that really mattered with her mom and her family. She spent that time with her, and she knew that that made her happy. I know a woman who's not able to communicate. She comes to one of the support groups, and she's not able to talk. But when we talk about horses, her face lights up, and so I can tell that we've communicated. We've helped her have a moment of joy. And so by getting to know somebody and what really matters to them, we can learn different strategies to connect with them in a way that offers them moments of joy and a sense of being able to still participate more fully in life. And so we talked about using some of the other senses. We can connect through touch, feeling different fabrics. You can put together different textures of fabric, and for folks to be able to feel the different fabrics and textures that can give them something to do. They call them fidget blankets or fidget muffs, and they just need something to do with their hands that can help them have something to do and connect by feeling different fabrics. Identifying different shapes by touch, again, different shapes and textures. Giving lotion hand massages can be incredibly therapeutic, especially if the lotion is scented. The feeling of touch and rubbing lotion into somebody's hands can be an incredible way to communicate and communicate a moment of joy. Identifying everyday items in a bag by touch so they can just feel them. That could be very confusing if they can't see them, but again, each activity, if it's appropriate, it certainly could be one to give somebody something to do and have a meaningful activity. Visiting with animals in many, many cases can be incredibly helpful and encouraging, and you know, it needs to be the kind of person that would enjoy that, and you know, you could try it if you don't know, but visiting with animals can certainly be very therapeutic. Sculpt using non-toxic materials. I heard of folks being able to knead bread. If it's somebody who loved making bread in their earlier life and hasn't done that for a while, being able to play with the dough, that could be incredibly encouraging and helpful. Holding the person's hand or stroking his or her arm or back, that can be a way to connect. Connecting through sight, just some ideas. Laminating brightly colored pictures to look at together, and they could be places in locations, geography, or moments in history or art. Watching videos of animals, nature, or travel, this can be incredibly helpful for somebody who needs something to do and to be encouraged. Looking at photo albums together, being able to reminisce, connecting with moments in their earlier lives. This can be a way to bring up some communication and maybe tell some stories about something that has happened in their past. Viewing photos of famous paintings, favorite settings of prominent people from the past. You could really come up with some great stories of some historical moments. This time of year, as we're looking at the elections, talking about previous elections might be of interest to somebody who's had that interest in their past. Go bird watching or visiting an aquarium, painting with watercolors, or go outdoor and sit by an open window together. So just some ideas of things that you can do. You can communicate and connect on an emotional level by using some of the other senses. Connecting through sound, listening to familiar music, to recordings of sounds of nature, farms, cities, or animals. identifying musical instruments by sound, listening to songs or speech in the person's native language. Sometimes when folks have learned a language and then later in life learned a second one, sometimes they regress back to an earlier point in their life and they remember the first language but not the second one. So that might be a way to connect with them and that is unique in a way to help them feel part of the world. Read books, poetry, scripture, newspaper articles to the person, again, if this is something they can connect with. And you can tell when you're doing some of these activities by their body language whether or not this is something they're finding encouraging or helpful. Let the person hear the gentle tone of your voice. So continuing to talk and communicate can make a difference. And I want to go back to the first one, listening to familiar music. We know now that the area of the brain where music happens or is stored is affected much later in the progression of the disease for most of the cases of dementia. And so people can still connect with music many times, many years after they've not been able to communicate with words. We've seen instances where when they have heard a familiar song, they maybe have not spoken for many, many years, and now they're singing along with a favorite or a familiar song or a hymn that they learned many years earlier. So the area of the brain where music is happening is still a place to connect with even when folks have lost their words. Not always, but in many cases. Connect through smell. Use small plastic bags containing items for the person to smell. So things like herbs and spices. Certainly somebody who loved to bake or who grew the herbs and spices. Cotton balls dipped in essential oils, grass clippings, or fragrant flowers. I talked to somebody recently and asked them about one of their favorite memories of going to summer school with the nuns in the summertime every year. Their family always did that. Well, what did they remember about it? Well, they remembered the smell of clover. Well, that's an important detail that may be helpful should they ever get dementia, they connected with this wonderful moment of their past by smelling clover. And I thought that was really interesting, that brought them back to a moment in time. So the sense of a familiar experience can connect and can be a way to communicate. Teas or coffee beans. Somebody might really love teas and coffee, and so that might be a way to connect with them. Using fragrant lotions for hand massages, or cook or feed the person foods that smell good, such as apple pie or chicken soup. Well, I like that idea. I think we should all have apple pie. Connect through taste. Certainly, we all love to have our favorite foods, home-baked goodies, popsicles, flavored drinks, ice cream, and puddings. Again, another way that we can communicate when we've lost our ability to use our words. So communication in all stages of the disease, kind of a summary. Number one, join the person's reality to connect with them. If we can connect with them with their reality, then we're going to have a much more emotional connection and be able to communicate better when we connect with them in their reality. We can't bring them to ours if they're in another place and time or in the disease process, but if we can connect with them in their reality, it can be a way for us to build the relationship. We need to understand and accept what you can and cannot change. This can help us better communicate. Remember that the person retains a sense of self despite the losses of the disease. I had somebody ask me about this statement the last time I did this presentation. She said, how do you know? How do you know they're still there? And you certainly hear about folks that they stop going to visit their loved one when they don't remember their name. And so how do you know they're still there? And studies have shown that folks who are knowledgeable and learn how to communicate and relate to folks with dementia, they have other strategies, like some of that we have talked about, certainly using music and touch, and you can still connect. And they've seen them through their body language and their facial expressions, you can really tell. So it's worth it to keep connecting and trying to find a different way to connect with them, even though that you might not know that they're still there. They are still there, and they have a sense of self despite the losses of their disease. Demonstrate respect and connect through their feelings. Certainly don't talk about them like they're not there. And we need to make sure that they're included And yes, we can get caught on this. Is we're having a conversation and we forget that they're still there, but then laugh about it or include them back into the conversation. We're going to make mistakes. We need to acknowledge that and deal with it and laugh about it when we can and apologize if that's appropriate, but we certainly need to respect and connect and pay attention to their feelings. Always treat the person as the adult he or she is. There are many times people use activities that are actually more appropriate for children for adults in the later stages of dementia. If they're feeling like this is a fun or interesting thing to do, then it's fine and it's respectful. But if they feel like it's demeaning, then we shouldn't do it. So things like coloring, using crayons, there's adult coloring now, so it's more often and more acceptable. But if people are feeling like it's demeaning, then we shouldn't use that way to communicate. Try to decode their person's communication. So try and learn their language. What are they trying to tell you? And see if you can figure it out. They give us clues, and we need to try and figure out what is it that they're trying to tell us. Recognize the effects of your mood and your actions. So in the one video where the gal realized that sometimes she snapped at her mom, she knew that she needed to figure out how to stop that. And if you have to actually stop, turn around, walk out of the room, adjust your attitude, put on a smile, and come back, it's worth it. We need to pay attention and recognize our own mood and actions because we're going to project that on the person that we're trying to communicate with. And so we get a chance to fix that when it's not going well. Stop, leave, come back with a new attitude and a new perspective. It's worth it to try and adjust our attitude and come back in a more positive emotion. Try to understand the source of reactions and help meet the needs while soothing and calming the person. And we're going to talk more about trying to understand the sources of the reactions next when we get into the behaviors suggestions. And this is Sam Fazio. He's a PhD and the Director of Special Projects for the National Office of the Alzheimer's Association. He's going to share his perspective.
Taking care of yourself while you care for somebody with the disease not only impacts your own health, but it really can impact the person with the disease. So for example, if you're not getting enough sleep, you might be easily irritated, which will then sort of spill over to your interactions with the person with the disease and maybe being short with them, which then might cause them to get frustrated. So it's not only important to take care of yourself for your own health, but really for you to really be a good caregiver.
He brings up a really good point. I have to tell you, I can get pretty cranky if I don't get my sleep. And if I was caring for a loved one with dementia, that would make it even more difficult. So caregivers really need to take good care of themselves. And that happens a lot where they don't. They think they got to do one more thing, one more thing, one more thing, and they get pretty exhausted. So reminding a caregiver that they need to take good care of themselves is really helpful. So these are some of the resources that are available through the Alzheimer's Association. The number one advice I can give is the 800 number. If anybody has questions anytime, 24/7, we recommend they call the 800 number. And I have these cards that are available. These are great to give families who are challenged with anything related to getting a diagnosis of dementia in their family. Whether it would be, I don't know how to handle this situation that's happening, or I have a loved one who lives across the country and I wish they had education, you can call the 800 number and get connected to education and to be able to talk to social workers anywhere in the country. You just tell them your zip code and they will connect you to local resources or provide education and support over the phone. We certainly have, through our website, all of these areas where you can find information about local resources. You can get connected to other people who have similar challenges. You can type in questions that you have, and other people who are along the journey as well can give their suggestion or comment about how they handle a situation. There's a safety center. We know that folks with dementia at some point likely will wander and get lost. It's not maybe, it's will. Eventually, folks will get lost in their surroundings. And so we have suggestions and information available of how you help stay safe if you have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease in yourself or in your family. There's suggestions about how to make your home more safe so that you can stay at home more longer, should that be your choice. We have support groups, education programs, and other resources available in the community nationwide. I have a whole list of education programs that I'm doing in this area this summer, and you can find them by going to Community Resource Finder and looking up education. Just put in your zip code, and it'll pull up all the education that's happening near you. The training line, we have free online training programs like this one and many other topics. And so by going to our website or calling the 800 number, you can get connected, and you can give advice and help to other family members by telling them to call the 800 number. I hear a lot of families say, or people who work in the industry, they're caregivers, and they say, I wish the family knew more information about how to communicate. Well, you can give them the 800 number and say, call them. They have tips of how to make this go easier, and you're helping them figure out the strategies to actually improve the quality of life for both themselves as family members and the person with dementia. There are other ways to get involved. This is not for everyone, but there are many people that that's their gift or passion to get involved. And even though there's no treatment and no cure right now for Alzheimer's disease, we don't know what's causing it, it can be incredibly frustrating. But by getting involved, it can be a way that folks can make an impact and make a difference to find a treatment or a cure in our future. So our Walk to End Alzheimer's is in September in the Des Moines area. The longest day is June 20th, coming up right around the corner. You can go to the website to find out about events in our area. You can volunteer, or you can just participate to increase awareness. There are opportunities to advocate, to help our legislators know more about what they can do to make an impact to improve the quality of life for both caregivers and for people with a diagnosis. If people want to learn how to learn about clinical trials in our area that they might qualify for, they can learn about Trial Match. They can call the 800 number and get connected, or through our website, and you can just get more information about clinical trials that they might qualify for. It's our biggest opportunity to find a treatment or a cure is when folks can participate in the clinical trials happening. So we have a tremendous amount of volunteer opportunities, and you can call the 800 number to find about volunteer opportunities in your area. It's a way you can make a difference, and it's not for everyone, but should that be something that would help you feel like this is something I can do, we can get you connected. Okay, and so with that, we typically open up with questions, but I'm going to go right on to the behaviors part of the program. We have a whole nother educational presentation on behaviors, and the topic of that one is called Understanding and Responding to Dementia-Related Behaviors. And I'm just going to go over the handout, I'll give you one, that is part of this program, because we talk a lot about the confusing behaviors. And when you hear the term behaviors, do you think of a positive experience or a negative experience? What do you typically think about for a dementia-related behavior? Is that a positive experience or a negative one? Any thoughts on that? You heard people talk about behaviors when it comes to dementia?
Usually negative.
Usually it's negative, yes. But what's happening when people are talking about their behaviors, kind of the bottom line about it is that when people lose their words, their behaviors become their way of communicating. So, so we need to be able to learn that new language that they're trying to tell us something. So this guide is a general guide for understanding and addressing behavior. We have a 4-step process, and you should use this for any kind of way you're trying to understand what's going on when somebody has a confusing behavior. Why are they doing that? Why are they acting the way they are? Well, number one, the first step is always to detect and connect. We need to join the person in his or her reality. So, you know, it's kind of like playing Clue, trying to figure out what are the clues they're trying to tell us. We need to connect with them in their reality. I try and think back, what are they doing, and what's they're trying to tell us from their body language. We want to understand their reality and context before intervening. Try and identify if they're able to talk to you, you know, who are they talking about, or what are they talking about? Where are they? Where are they in their reality? Do they believe that they are living in their life 20 or 40 years ago? So you can, and many times you can ask them, where are you right now, or who is it you're trying to talk to? We'll hear about situations where family members will want to see or go visit somebody who's already passed away. Well, they might be living in their reality in their life. They're regressed back to an earlier point in their life, and they might be thinking about a time when their parent is still living, and in this situation they've already passed away. So if we want to connect with them with their reality, we want to try and find out what are they trying to be, or how are they trying to live in whatever year they believe that it is. If they want to go visit somebody that's passed away, we never tell them that they've passed away because they don't remember. They are going to go through grief again if we tell them. Like they want to visit their parents are gone, and we tell them they're gone, now they're going to go through grief again. They don't remember that this has already happened. But what we can do is ask them about that connection. We can connect with them because that's what they're trying to do, is connect with this family member. They may, yes, they want to go visit them, but they want to celebrate that relationship is really what they're asking. So you can ask them, if they're able to talk at all, about that relationship. Ask them about their mom or their dad, and, find out about those happy moments that they're trying to connect with. Step 2, we need to address physical issues first. So, and the first thing we need to look for is pain. If somebody is having a difficult behavior, we need to try to identify, are they in pain? When somebody has dementia and they've lost their ability to know that they're in pain, then they're going to express their discomfort with confusing and difficult behaviors. So you can just all imagine, let's say you all have dementia right now. You are in the middle to later stages of dementia. You can't talk, you can't explain where your pain is, and you have pain. Let's say you've got pain in your back, but you can't point to where that pain is in your back. You don't have the ability to anymore. Your brain isn't connecting to, there's pain, and I can't point to where it is in my body. Your brain isn't working. But you have pain. So you're also in this situation, let's say you're thirsty and you're hungry and you have to go to the bathroom and you've got pain. Tell anybody that. You've lost your words. Can you imagine what your behavior will be? Okay, now it's an hour later. Now imagine what your behavior might be. Because you don't have the ability to tell your care person what's wrong. Are you going to be agitated? Are you going to be angry? Are you going to be lashing out? Yes. And so something is wrong if there are confusing behaviors. And pain is something we need to assess first. So we should address the physical problems first, try and identify, are they hungry or thirsty? Do they need to use the bathroom? Is there a reaction to medication? Are there ill-fitting dentures or other stuff that, like braces or things that we all need when we get older? There's extra stuff that we put on our bodies to help us, but if they don't fit, that's going to be pretty uncomfortable. So if we can find out if there's something like that going on, that's something we can fix. And then, the behaviors might go away. So we connect with them, we get to know the person. Step 1, always try and find out, how can we connect with this person and be with them in their reality, approach the person calmly and respectfully. Step 2, address their physical needs, whether it's hunger or thirst or medication or pain. Then we look for environmental triggers that might be an impact for their discomfort, like their clothing. Does it fit them? Is it too tight? Is the room temperature good or bad? Is it getting hot? Is the lighting or glare or sounds a problem? I heard about a family who is struggling with difficult behaviors late in the day, and they didn't realize that the sun was glaring in late in the day where their loved one was sitting. And once they were able to notice that they needed to just pull down the blinds, that they were getting too hot where they typically sat, then the behaviors went away. So for them, it was just an environmental thing. Again, we just got to become detectives and try and identify what could be causing this discomfort. And just by using the clues that are there that are confusing, we can sometimes identify what's in the way. Okay, step 3 is address emotional needs. So again, we need to become detectives to trying to find out is there an emotional need that's not being met. We think about the situation and how it might be feeling to the person. We focus on feelings, not facts. So there will be some facts to look at, but we need to find out, what's the expression on their face? How are they feeling? Do they look sad or angry? That's a different response that we can deal with once we start noticing the expressions on their faces. Reinforce that you're there to help. In my story about the guy with the animal under his bed, we kept saying, we're here to help you. That one wasn't working too well, until we acknowledged and validated what was important to him. But in many cases, it is helpful to let them know you want to be part of the solution. They're probably thinking that we're being a bunch of fools if we're not getting it, but letting them know that we care and want to be part of the solution can help. Use your knowledge of the person's personal preferences to provide effective interventions. A story along this one is, how do we all like to get ready for bed? Some of us need to take a shower before we go to bed, or some of us wear pajamas, some of us don't, some wear pants, some need an extra pillow, some like the fan on, some can't have the fan on, some have to have music going or go to sleep with the TV on. Well, imagine you get your routine and your roommate's just the opposite, or your care person doesn't know how you like to sleep. Well, that's going to make you agitated if things aren't going the way you need them to go. So knowing and having the knowledge of any person's preferences can help us be able to improve a situation where there might be confusing behaviors. Redirect energy into a more soothing activity. Many times we're able to redirect someone to a soothing situation can help improve our mood and try and identify what the real issue is, or calm things down so that you can try and identify what the real issue is. So that's step 3 is addressing the emotional needs, and step 4, reassess and plan for the next time. So let's say you finally identify how to deal with the confusing behavior. You got a solution. Well, it's really important to write it down so that you can share this in the future and notice all the environmental factors that were going on. What time of day, what was the temperature, who else was in the room, what were all of the environmental factors that could have created the challenging situation. So by keeping a log and writing this all down, it can help in the future, and it can help communicate to other family members or caregivers what works and what doesn't work. You certainly want to write down what doesn't work and what makes somebody even more agitated. We can make adjustments to the plan and communicate that by reassessing and make a plan again for the next time. Create an intervention plan that includes who can help with the assessment and the intervention, how to recognize the signs of an issue returning, how quickly you need to respond. Sometimes you can make a note of at what point do we need to intervene before it really escalates. And again, write that down. Keep track of what works and what doesn't work. What to try and in what order, what to avoid. How to assess the effectiveness of your intervention, and what to do if the situation escalates or your interventions are ineffective. We certainly want to document those kinds of situations. And in your handout, we have an intervention workshop. When you're working with somebody with dementia, here's just a quick way to track your process, what works and what doesn't work, and you can certainly make copies of this and then be able to use that in future situations. And the process is the same, whether you're talking about somebody being agitated or if, and certainly document when we have a positive experience. What makes people happy? This is even more important to use that kind of behavior, a positive behavior. Let's write those things down so that we can recreate those moments to better be able to manage, to understand and manage behaviors and have a better relationship with somebody when you're dealing with something like dementia. Okay, questions? Comments?
So in Iowa, do we have, you had mentioned like, somebody will end up wandering and get lost. Do we have a silver alert here? I don't know. In other states, they call it a silver alert.
Yes, I don't believe that we have a silver alert program.
I think it's under discussion, but I don't think it's
Okay.
formal
Yeah.
Okay.
at this point. And I don't know whether it was legislation that didn't get passed or it's just in the process. Nicole, do you know anything about a silver alert?
No.
It's kind of like the 411, the 211. Yeah, I haven't heard that it's been formalized.
Okay.
In the city of Des Moines, there's a program called LOST. It stands for Loved Ones Safe and Together,
Okay.
where you can register your loved one with the local police department, and then at least you're talking about and letting someone know that, you know, they haven't ever left at this point, but I'm concerned that they sometimes get lost, and so if they're out for a walk and you find them, we need to help them get safely back home. It's important to tell neighbors and friends the situation, because if we can talk about it, then it's a natural, it's just part of life. We don't need to be afraid of it. If we can talk about it, then we can help people have a better quality of life. So that's one of the things we recommend. We do have medical alert bracelets. We recommend people get ID bracelets and have their phone number available should someone get lost. They can help find their way home. So there are some safety programs like that available. Good question. Anything else you can think of? I really appreciate you joining in today. I hope this was helpful. Again, you can call the 800 number should you have any questions about communicating. And in fact, you know, you can talk about a situation. You can say, I have a loved one. Here's what's happening. What are some ideas of what I could try? What am I missing? I had a family who was, it was an adult, a woman, it was about my age, and her dad had Alzheimer's, and she was so frustrated with them because she was playing cards with him, and she kept saying, he's cheating, and it makes me crazy. They play cards their whole life, and he's never cheated. What's going on here? And then she kept talking about it, and she said, he put down they were playing Go Fish. He put down a 2 and a 5, and he said they matched. Well, they didn't match. And I told her that sometimes people have vision problems, and what if he really thought they matched? And he wasn't cheating. He thought they really matched. And she's like, oh. I mean, the light bulb totally came on. So it's a situation like that where you could call somebody and explain the situation, and they could catch on to the clues about what was going on. And so she just kept getting frustrated. She wouldn't play cards with him anymore, and he loved to play cards. But when she realized that, you know, she could look at it differently, then they could go back to having this moment of joy. So calling the 800 number or calling our office to kind of talk through some situations, in many cases, could be helpful. So.
Well, thank you very much. For those of you who were joining us online, we're going to send you the materials electronically. And then for those who watch in the future, we'll have those available as downloads when you log in. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.